I was always a bad copy of my sister, as my father used to say. Kiona could do anything. Coming home at the crack of dawn, failing tests, switching boyfriends like a glove, and still be the perfect daughter. I, Tallulah Bramble, managed to annoy everyone by my mere existence. Our two-story house on the outskirts of Henderson was like 100 others white siding, a neat lawn, and a crack in the driveway that my father had promised to fix before I was born. I grew up in it, memorizing where the floorboards creaked so I wouldn't wake anyone when I came home from my night job. Typical suburbia, where everyone smiles at the neighbors and the houses fight a cold war. "Tallulah, are you wearing those hideous shoes again?" My mother's voice stopped me in the hallway. Ziva Bramble rarely raised her voice, preferring to kill with her frustrated tone. "You're 21 years old and you dress like a troubled teenager." My old army boots, shabby and comfortable, were the only thing I'd picked out myself. Everything else, boring jeans and blouses, was bought by my mother, insisting that I be a little more feminine. "I'm comfortable in them," I shrugged, trying not to confront her. "Heels aren't very practical on a construction site." "On a construction site," she pursed her lips as if I'd said something obscene. "Kiona works in a decent place, with decent people, and never gets her hands dirty, I know," I interrupted the usual lecture. "I need money for textbooks, and the pharmacy isn't hiring." My mother sighed with a look on her face as if I had personally caused all of her life's misfortunes. "Your father will be back in an hour. Try not to annoy him today. He's had a rough day." Orrin Bramble seemed to have a rough day every day. Having taught high school history for 25 years, he considered himself an underappreciated genius, forced to explain battle dates to ungrateful teenagers instead of lecturing at prestigious universities. He brought that bitterness home every night, along with his worn briefcase and the smell of chalk. I went up to my room, small, with faded wallpaper and a view of the neighbor's garage. Across the hall was Kiona's bedroom, spacious, with its own bathroom and a large window. "She needs more room to study," my father had explained when I was 12, and didn't understand why my sister got the better room. There was an envelope on the desk that I'd been afraid to open all morning. Johns Hopkins Medical University, the place I'd sent my application to, not believing I'd succeeded. My hands trembled as I tore open the heavy paper. "Dear Miss Bramble, we are pleased to announce." I reread the first paragraph twice, not believing my eyes. I had been accepted. They had actually accepted me, with a partial scholarship covering half of the tuition. My laughter was nervous, almost hysterical. All those nights behind textbooks, all those extra hours in the lab, all those weekends studying for tests instead of going to the movies. None of it had been for nothing. I sank down on the bed, clutching the letter. Joy was quickly replaced by panic. Even with the partial scholarship, there was still a huge amount of money I couldn't afford. 3 years of part-time jobs as a construction worker, waitress, and assistant at the veterinary clinic had given me a modest savings, but it would be enough for 1 semester at most. I needed help from my parents. The same parents who had paid for Kiona's pharmacy college entirely, including her sudden decision to take an extra year to find herself. I heard the front door slam. My father had returned. Folding the letter, I took a deep breath. It was now or never. Orrin Bramble was sitting at the dining room table, looking over some papers. He was tall, with a military bearing and a perpetually disgruntled expression, more like an overseer than a father. His dark hair, neatly combed back, was beginning to gray at the temples, which he said was the result of living with 2 daughters. "Dad," I stopped in the doorway, clutching the envelope. "I have news." He looked up, and his gaze, as always, made me feel small and insignificant. "If this is just another minimum-wage part-time job, you don't have to bother." "No, it's—" I took a step forward. "I got accepted to Johns Hopkins Medical School, with a partial scholarship." Mother, who was chopping vegetables for a salad, froze with knife in hand. The father slowly put the pen away. "Johns Hopkins," he repeated with an intonation I couldn't decipher. "So how are you going to pay for this?" Not, "Congratulations," not, "We're proud of you." Straight to the financial question. "I have savings, and the scholarship covers half of it." I tried to sound confident. "But I need help. I can get a part-time job while I study and— Help, he grinned, exchanging a glance with my mother. Of course you need help. You always have. Oren. His mother put a hand on his shoulder. Maybe we could— We've already spent a fortune on Kiona's education, he cut off. I see no reason to throw money away again. Throw money away? I felt the blood rush to my face. You paid for Kiona's college in full. Why don't I deserve the same? Because Kiona knows what she wants. My father stood up, towering over me. She's always been goal-oriented, unlike you. How many times have you changed your dreams? First veterinarian, then biologist, now doctor. In a year, you'll give that up too. I never quit. My voice was shaking with resentment. I was just exploring different options. And I've always wanted to help people, always been interested in medicine. Tallulah, sweetheart, my mother interjected with fake concern in her voice. Being a doctor is very difficult. There's so much to learn, so much responsibility. Maybe you should choose something more appropriate? More appropriate. Code for less ambitious. Less impressive. Something that won't make Kiona look worse. I want to be a surgeon. I straightened up, clenching my fists. I can be a surgeon. I have perfect grades, recommendations from all my professors. Grades, my father snorted. You think good grades make you a good doctor? What you lack is character. You're too soft, too insecure. The first patient with a serious problem, you'll break. Every word he said was a blow. All my doubts, all the fears I'd been hiding deep inside, he pulled them out and threw them in my face. I won't break, I whispered. I'm stronger than you think. You're not strong, Tallulah. Father shook his head. You're stubborn. It's different. At that moment, the front door swung open and Kiona burst into the house, bright, confident, loud. My older sister, a source of pride for my parents and a constant reminder of my inferiority. You won't believe what happened today, she began to tell me from the doorway, oblivious to the tension in the room. Dr. Phelps said I'm the best intern he's ever seen, and— She stopped talking, finally noticing my envelope and the expressions on our faces. What's going on here? Your sister thinks we should pay for her whim to play doctor, Dad replied dryly. After all we've spent on your education. Kiona glared at me. There was no malice in her eyes, just mild irritation, like I was a pesky fly. Oh, you applied after all? She sat down on the edge of the table. Honestly, I thought it was just talk. Don't you think you're setting your sights a little too high? Medicine isn't a toy, you know. I know, I snapped back. Unlike you, I read a lot about the profession before I made up my mind. Don't sass your sister. My mother pursed her lips. Kiona's just worried about you. No, she's not worried. I felt something break inside me. None of you are worried. You just don't want me to accomplish anything more than I had planned, lest I suddenly find myself more successful than my favorite daughter. My father's face darkened. It was an expression I knew well. The storm was coming. That's it, he said in a quiet voice that was more dangerous than a shout. You're jealous of your sister. I always have been. That's why this sudden idea of becoming a surgeon is just an attempt to prove that you're just as good. I'm not jealous, I shouted. I just want you to support me the way you supported her, for once in your life. Support? Dad slammed his fist on the table. We fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head. We put up with your antics, your mood swings, your mediocre results. And now you demand that we shell out tens of thousands of dollars for a whim that you'll drop in 6 months? It's not a whim. My voice shook. This is my future. My life. Your life. He shook his head. You know what I see when I look at you? A loser. A person who never follows through on anything. You think med school's gonna make you special? That you're suddenly not who you are anymore? His words hit me right in the heart, finding all my fears and doubts. I'm not a loser, I whispered. Prove it. He crossed his arms over his chest. Without our help. If you're so sure of yourself, find a way to pay your own tuition. Make us proud of you. Oren! Her mother tried to intervene, but he stopped her with a gesture. No, Zivak. It's time she learned to take responsibility for her decisions. We will not pay for this adventure. I looked at my mother for support, but she looked away, as she always does. Kiona watched the scene with a slight smile, as if she were watching an entertaining TV show. Okay, I took a deep breath. I'll be fine on my own, without your help. Of course you will, my father grinned. The usual, 6 months of enthusiasm and then tears and admitting it was too hard, that you weren't cut out for it, that it was everyone else's fault but yours. Something clicked in my head, like a switch. Years of resentment, of not being told, of constantly feeling like I wasn't good enough, came rushing out. You have no idea what I'm capable of. My voice was surprisingly calm. You never gave me a chance to show it. It was always just Kiona, the beautiful, perfect Kiona. Even when she failed her exams, even when she got kicked out of the club for drinking, even when she wrecked your car, Dad. Everything was forgiven, everything was justified. And me? I could get a top grade and you'd find something to complain about. I could work 24 hours a day, and you'd say I was lazy. What's wrong with me? Why couldn't you ever just, love me? The room fell into silence. Kiona stared at the floor, looking awkward for the first time. Her mother froze, clamping her mouth with the palm of her hand. And Father looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. Love, he said quietly. We have always loved you, Tallulah. But love doesn't mean indulging all your fantasies. Sometimes love is telling the truth, even if it's painful. And the truth is that you're not ready for what you're asking for. Get out. The words spoken softly struck me more than if he'd shouted them. If you're so sure you can do this on your own without our help, prove it. Get out and don't come back until you succeed, or admit defeat. Oren! Mother screamed. You can't. I can. He cut her off. She's 21. She's an adult. If she wants to be independent, let her be. But on my terms, not hers. I stared at him in a daze. He was kicking me out. He was really kicking me out of the house. You're giving me time to pack? My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. Take what you can carry. He turned away, signaling that the conversation was over. Walking up to my room, I felt like I was in a dream. Mechanically, I pulled out my backpack and began to put away the essentials. Clothes, documents, a few books, a laptop, a picture of my grandmother, the only person who believed in me unconditionally. She was long gone. When I came downstairs, the family was sitting around the table, having dinner as if nothing had happened, as if one of them hadn't been kicked out of the house. I'm leaving, I said, stopping in the doorway. Kiona looked up. Her eyes flashed with something like regret, but it quickly disappeared. Good luck, sis, she said with a fake smile. Call me when you realize you're not much of a doctor. Mother sat with her head down. She had always been like that, avoiding conflict, hiding behind her father's back, letting him make all the decisions, even the cruel ones. Ziva, her father's voice was cold. Do you have something to say to your daughter? She looked up, her eyes full of tears, but said nothing. She just stared at me, helpless and pathetic. Get lost, loser, my father said without looking at me. Prove me wrong, if you can. I walked out of the house I'd grown up in with one backpack on my back and a few $100s in my pocket. The evening sun lit up the street where I knew every stone, every tree. I might never come back here again. And the strange thing was, the thought didn't make me sad. Only relief and determination. I would prove them wrong, all of them. And one day they will regret every word they said, every dream they shattered, every opportunity they missed to support me. I'll be who I want to be, without them, in spite of them. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I slept at the bus station for 3 nights before I found lodging. A small room in a semi-basement, with questionable plumbing and neighbors whose loud music kept me up at night. But it was mine, the first space of my own, where I didn't have to shrink, making myself smaller, more invisible. Johns Hopkins University was gorgeous and intimidating at the same time. Walking around campus on my first day, I felt like an imposter among confident students, many of whom came from affluent families. My shabby backpack and cheap clothes made me stand out like a neon sign. You're Tallulah Bramble, aren't you? A full-bodied guy with a lock of red hair called out to me as I studied the schedule on the information board. I'm Fergus Tench. We sat next to each other in the introductory lecture. I barely remembered him. The first day was a blur, full of fear and excitement. Yes, I held out my hand. Sorry, still trying to remember names and faces. No problem, he smiled, and his round face became even more good-natured. Would you like to join our study group? We meet in the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays. My first instinctive urge was to say no. At Henderson, I was used to studying alone, avoiding group study sessions where comparisons to Kiona's brilliant results inevitably began. I'd love to, but I have to work in the evenings, I replied, already preparing my standard excuse. We meet in the afternoon from 2 to 4. Fergus didn't back down. Look, first year here is hell. No one survives on their own, believe me. Something in his sincerity and lack of falseness made me nod. Okay, I'll be there Tuesday. So began my friendship with Fergus Tench, the son of a British diplomat and a Nepali artist, who had grown up in 10 countries and spoke 5 languages. He was smart, sarcastic, and absolutely confident in my abilities, even when I doubted them. And I doubted myself all the time. Every exam, every practical lesson turned into a battlefield, not so much with the material as with my father's voice in my head. You can't do it. This is too hard for you. Everyone can see what a failure you are. Financial problems haunted me like a shadow. Even with a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs, at the hospital cafeteria in the morning and at the laundromat on weekends, there was barely enough money to pay for my room, food, and textbooks. New clothes or entertainment were out of the question. By the end of the first semester, I had lost 7 pounds, was sleeping 4 hours a night, and was close to a nervous breakdown. One night, I just collapsed at the door of my room, unable to find the strength to even put the key in the lock. I don't know how long I sat like that before my roommate found me. "Damn, you look like a corpse," she commented, helping me up. "How long have you been like this?" "Like a corpse?" I smiled weakly. "Or as a whole?" "Both. All my life, I think." The next day, Fergus dragged me to the student support office. I protested the whole way, assuring him that I could manage on my own, that I didn't need help, that it was just a temporary hardship. "Tallulah," he stopped in the middle of the hallway, looking at me seriously. "You are the most stubborn person I know, and believe me, I've lived in Scotland, but this is not a survival contest. Accepting help is not a weakness." The office helped me apply for an extra scholarship for struggling students and found me a better-paying job as an assistant in a research lab. For the first time, I felt like the system was working for me, not against me. The second year was easier. I made a small but reliable group of friends, Fergus and 3 other students, with whom we spent endless hours with over textbooks and coffee. Working in the lab gave me access to professors and research that I could only dream of before. Still, something was gnawing at me from the inside. Despite my excellent grades and the praise of my professors, I couldn't shake the feeling that at any moment I would be exposed. That everyone would see me for what I really was, a girl from Henderson, unworthy of being here among the best. In my 3rd year, there was a meeting that changed everything. The medical students were rotating through different departments, and I ended up in cardiac surgery. The head of the department was Dr. Oberoi Nash, a legendary figure who was the subject of the most conflicting rumors. Some said she was a genius, some said she was a ruthless tyrant, others said she slept no more than 3 hours a night and subsisted solely on coffee and sarcasm. When I first saw her, she was up to her elbows in blood, bent over a patient's open chest. A short Indian woman with smoothly slicked-back graying hair and piercing black eyes that seemed to see right through you. "You!" She pointed a bloody instrument at me. "Come closer. What do you see?" I stepped toward the operating table, feeling my knees turn to jelly. The patient's heart was contracting, exposed and vulnerable. Dr. Nash had just finished the bypass. "I see." My voice shook, and I took a deep breath. "I see the shunt is 5 millimeters to the left of its optimal position." There was silence in the operating room. Dr. Nash looked at me like I had just spoken Martian. "Interesting." She shifted her gaze to the heart. "How would you fix it?" I swallowed, mentally cursing myself for opening my mouth at all, but it was too late to backtrack. "I'd use a double suture technique with a 45-degree angle to compensate for the displacement without disrupting blood flow." Dr. Nash nodded to the anesthesiologist. "Keep an eye on the vitals." Then turned to me. "Okay, sharp-eyed student, show me how you do it." What?" I stared at her in horror. "But I know you never have." She sounded impatient. "I'm not asking you to do this. I'm asking you to show me. Describe the moves, the tools, the sequence." I spent the next 10 minutes explaining in detail a procedure I'd only seen in textbooks and videos before. To my surprise, Dr. Nash followed my instructions, adjusting the shunt position exactly as I described. "Not bad," she said when she was done. "For someone who's never held a scalpel. What's your name?" "Tallulah Bramble." "I'll remember," she nodded. "Now go away. I've got 3 more hours of work to do." The next day I was called into her office. I was sure she wanted to reprimand me for my insolence yesterday. Instead, she offered me a place on her research team. "You have something that can't be taught," she said as she looked over my grades. "Intuition, spatial reasoning. Surgeons with these qualities are born once a decade." "But I thought surgeons were born after years of training," I objected. "Technique, yes." She set the papers aside. "But to see what others miss. Making decisions when seconds count? You can't teach that. You either have it or you don't. You have it. The rest will come." And so began my apprenticeship with Dr. Nash. She was a demanding mentor, never praising, rarely smiling, expecting perfection in everything. But she was also the first person who unconditionally believed in my potential. "Why did you choose me?" I asked her once, after a particularly grueling 8-hour surgery where I had assisted her. She washed her hands without looking at me. "Because you reminded me of me when I was your age." "You?" I couldn't imagine this confident, brilliant woman as an inexperienced student. "Me." She finally turned around. "My parents wanted me to marry my cousin and have children. When I said I wanted to be a surgeon, my father disowned me. Said I'd die, an old maid in a foreign country, with no family and no blessing." She grinned. "He was right about the old maid and the foreign country, but I have never once regretted my choice." It was the only time she spoke of her past, and the only time I felt that behind her tough mask was someone who understood my pain. My residency years flew by at a breakneck pace. I specialized in cardiac surgery, spending most of my time in the operating room or in the lab. Fergus chose neurosurgery, but we were still close friends, often having dinner together after shifts and discussing difficult cases. "Don't you think we're weird?" he asked one night as we sat in a 24-hour diner, the only place open at 3 in the morning. Normal people our age are dating, traveling, living, and we're discussing pork heart valves over pancakes. I shrugged, smiling. Maybe we'd just found something more interesting than a normal life. Or we both ran away from something. He looked at me carefully. Me from my father, who had been planning my diplomatic career since I was born. You from your family. We chose professions where we could save others because no one saved us. His words hit something deep inside me. I had never thought of my choice as a form of escape or compensation, but perhaps he was right. "Even so," I said, "what difference does it make? We do what we love, what we're good at." "It doesn't," Fergus agreed. "I just wonder how much more we have to achieve before we stop hearing their voices in our heads." I didn't answer, because despite all my progress, my father's voice hadn't gone anywhere. "It's just luck. Sooner or later, you're going to make a mistake. You're still a failure, just with a medical degree." Once, during a particularly difficult surgery, I nearly succumbed to that voice. The patient was on edge, multiple shunts, complicated anatomy, high risk. I was standing at the operating table, hands gloved, instrument ready, and suddenly I heard, "You're not gonna make it." "Dr. Bramble?" The anesthesiologist called out. "Is everything okay?" I froze, unable to make the first incision. At that moment, Dr. Nash entered the operating room. She was just observing this surgery, not participating. "Tallulah," she said quietly, using my name for the first time in years. "You're the best surgeon in this room, including me. Do your thing." Her words broke the dam. I made the incision, and the world narrowed to this moment, this patient, this surgery. 6 hours later, we closed the chest, and the vitals were stable. "You don't need my voice anymore," Dr. Nash said as we washed our hands. Find your own. The last year of residency brought an unexpected offer from Boston, a position as chief cardiac surgeon at one of the most prestigious hospitals on the East Coast. In my 30s, I would be the youngest person ever to hold this position. It's an incredible opportunity. Fergus raised his glass as we celebrated at our favorite bar. I'll miss our late-night conversations about pork valves, though. I haven't made a decision yet. I twirled my glass in my hands. Dr. Nash suggests I stay here on her team. What's stopping you? I was silent for a long time, not knowing how to explain what had been tormenting me for the past few weeks. Maybe it's too much. I finally spoke up. What if they're wrong about me? What if I'm not ready? Fergus sighed. Lula, how much more proof do you need? An honors degree? Check. Publications in medical journals? 6. Successful surgeries that others thought were hopeless? Dozens. What else? Nobel Prize? A declaration of love from all the patients? I smiled, but the anxiety wouldn't go away. What if this was all just luck? A coincidence? What if at some point everyone realized I was really just a girl from Henderson who'd gone too far? That's your father talking. Fergus leaned closer. Not you. You were never in Henderson, Lula. You've always been here, in the operating room, saving lives. They just never let you see it before. A week later, I accepted an offer from Boston. Dr. Nash didn't look surprised. It's the right choice, she nodded. You need your own field, your own team, your reputation, not as my protégé, but as Tallulah Bramble. The day I left, she gave me a small box. Inside was a surgical clamp, obviously old but perfectly preserved. My first instrument, she explained. My father gave it to me when I told him I wanted to be a doctor, before he thought I'd betrayed the family. I was shocked. I can't accept that. You can and you will, she cut her off. It's not sentimentality. It's tradition. Someday you'll pass it on to someone who reminds you of you. Boston greeted me with a cold wind and skeptical stares. A young woman is the chief cardiac surgeon? In the conservative medical community, this was questionable to say the least. The first few months were a test of strength. Every surgery, every decision, every word was tested and evaluated, but I didn't back down. Methodically, operation after operation, I proved my right to be there. By the end of the first year, my reputation was impeccable, and the waiting list for consultations stretched for months on end. On my 30th birthday, I stood at my office window on the 20th floor, looking out at the lights of Boston. I had my own team, an authored bypass technique, and peer recognition. I had achieved everything I could have dreamed of. And yet something was wrong. In the silence, when all the congratulations had died down and the presents were opened, I felt a familiar emptiness, the same hunger that no amount of success could quench. Fergus was right. I could still hear my father's voice, quieter, but it was there, whispering that it wasn't enough, that I still hadn't proved him wrong. I picked up my phone, looking at the contact list. The home number in Henderson was still there, untouched all these years later. My finger hovered over the call button. No, not today. Maybe never. I put the phone away and turned to the desk where the medical histories demanding my attention lay. My new life, my real family. I had surgery this morning, and that was all that mattered. Monday morning started as usual. My alarm went off at 5:30. I was in the hospital gym at 6, and by 7 I had completed patient rounds. A normal start to a normal day. Nothing foretold that by evening my carefully constructed life would be shaken by a collision with a past I thought buried. Dr. Bramble, Rita, the head nurse, called out to me as I left the patient's room after my morning rounds. Dr. Callahan is waiting for you in your office. He says it's urgent. Mark Callahan was the chief of cardiac emergencies. If he wanted to see me urgently, it meant I had a complicated case that required immediate surgical consultation. Tallulah, he rose to meet me as I entered the office. I apologize for the suddenness of this, but we have an emergency. 63-year-old male, severe angina, unstable hemodynamics. Echo and angiogram show triple stenosis, need bypass, ASAP. Why did you come to me? I frowned. Usually it's enough to send a medical history. Mark looked strangely embarrassed, which was unusual for this normally confident surgeon with 20 years of experience. The thing is, he paused. The patient is from Henderson, and his last name is Bramble. Orrin Bramble. Time has stopped. The sounds of the hospital, the beeping of the monitors, the voices in the hallway, the noise of the ventilation all disappeared, replaced by a ringing silence. I felt the blood drain from my face. Are you sure? My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. Absolutely. Mark handed me the clipboard with his medical history on it. He was in Boston for a history teachers' conference when it happened. The ambulance brought him to us last night. I automatically flipped through the medical history. The professional part of me was already analyzing the data from the exams, assessing the risks, planning the surgery. The angiogram photos left no doubt. My father needed emergency bypass surgery. Without surgery, his chances were minimal. Does he know I'm here? That I work at this hospital? I asked, keeping my eyes on the clipboard. I don't think so. Mark shook his head. He was unconscious when they brought him in. Now he's on sedatives waiting for a decision on whether to operate. But he hesitated. His wife and daughter are with him. They're in the waiting room, the mother and Kiona. Here in my hospital, in my world, which I've so carefully separated from anything to do with Henderson. I could hand the case over to Jenkins, Mark suggested, watching my reaction carefully. He's an excellent surgeon, he'd be fine. Jenkins was an experienced heart surgeon, my second in command, a really good one, but not the best. Not like me. No, I straightened, feeling the professional mask fall into place. I'll do the surgery. Prep the OR for 10 o'clock in the morning. And, Mark, I paused. Don't tell the family I'm operating. I'll talk to them myself. When I left the office, I went not to the waiting room, but to the roof of the hospital, the only place where I could be truly alone. The cold February wind burned my face, but it was exactly what I needed to come back to reality, to feel the present. 9 years. 9 years since I'd left my home in Henderson with one backpack, no money, and no foothold. 9 years I've been building a new life, a new me. I didn't call, I didn't write, I didn't seek information about my parents or my sister. Sometimes, of course, I was tempted to ask how they were doing, to tell them about my successes. But I suppressed it. Why? To hear, it's just luck? To feel small and unworthy again? And now fate, with cruel irony, has brought them right to me. A father whose life is now literally in my hands. A mother and sister forced to meet me in my world, where I'm not a failed daughter, but Dr. Bramble, the chief heart surgeon. I could have said no. I could have handed the case over to Jenkins. No one would have judged me. Conflict of interest, emotional involvement, the perfect professional excuse to avoid confronting the past. But that would be cowardice. And I swore to myself 9 years ago that I would never again let fear determine my decisions. Besides, no matter how hard I tried to deny it, I was the best surgeon for this operation. With my technique, with my experience, my father's chances were maximized. Isn't that what the Hippocratic Oath is all about? Doing the best for the patient, regardless of personal feelings? The decision has been made. I'll do the surgery. And so be it. Descending from the roof, I made my way to the waiting room. Slow, confident steps down the hallway, white coat, stethoscope around my neck. Everything that made up my professional armor. None of the colleagues I met along the way would have suspected that a hurricane was raging inside me. I saw them from a distance, 2 women sitting side by side on the plastic chairs of the waiting room. One older, with gray hair gathered into a careless bun, the other younger, with impeccable styling and makeup even in this stressful situation. My mother and sister, and so alien, like they were from another planet. Mrs. Bramble? I stopped in front of them, my voice sounding professional and detached. Both looked up. A second of incomprehension, then shock slowly spreading across their faces. Tallulah? The mother rose, reaching out hesitantly but hesitating to touch as if I were a mirage. Is that you? Hello? I nodded, keeping my distance. I'm Dr. Bramble, chief cardiac surgeon. I'll be operating on your husband. Kiona stood up abruptly, her eyes widening. You? You're gonna operate on my father? There was disbelief in her voice. Is this some kind of joke? I assure you, this is no joke. I shifted my gaze to my sister. Your father has a serious coronary artery disease that requires immediate surgical intervention. I'll perform an aortocoronary bypass. The surgery is scheduled for 10 o'clock. But, how did you get here? My mom was still looking at me like I was a ghost. We didn't know anything. All these years. I work here, I answered simply. For 3 years now. Are you really the chief surgeon? Kiona crossed her arms over her chest, doubt clearly evident in her tone. I could talk about my credentials, my publications, my successful surgeries. I could have mentioned that I'd been offered positions at Mayo and the Cleveland Clinic, that my bypass technique was being taught in medical schools, but instead I just said, yes, and I'm the best person to do the surgery my father had. The mother slumped back in her chair, clearly shaken. Oren doesn't know you're here. He's been thinking about you a lot, especially in recent years. Those words should have meant something to me, but I didn't let my emotions break through my professional mask. I need to do a pre-op exam, I said, ignoring her words. You can be there if you want. The three of us entered my father's room. Oren Bramble was lying in a hospital bed, tangled in wires and tubes, so small and vulnerable compared to the formidable man I remembered. The gray had completely covered his hair, wrinkles furrowed his face. 9 years had aged him 20. He was conscious and looked up when we entered. At first his gaze slid over me blankly, as if I were just another doctor, but then he froze, blinked, and his eyes widened in recognition. Tallulah? His voice was weak, but it held the same disbelief as my mother and sister. Hello, Mr. Bramble. I approached his bedside, professionally aloof. I'm Dr. Bramble, Chief Cardiac Surgeon. I'll be performing your surgery today. He looked at me like I was a drug-induced hallucination. You're a doctor? A surgeon? Cardiac surgeon, I corrected, pulling out my stethoscope. I need to examine you before the surgery. I spent the next 10 minutes methodically going over the exam, explaining the procedure, the risks, the prognosis, everything I usually told patients before surgery. Only this patient was my father, the man who 9 years ago told me I was a loser and kicked me out of the house. Do you have any questions? I asked, finishing my explanation. My father was looking at me, and his eyes were a strange mixture of emotions, mistrust, confusion, and something else I couldn't or wouldn't recognize. Are you really going to do the surgery? His voice sounded unsure. Are you sure you can handle it? The question, so familiar, so typical of him, was suddenly not anger, but something akin to pity. He really had no idea what I had become. I've performed over 200 of these operations in the last 3 years, Mr. Bramble, I answered calmly, a 98% success rate. So, yes, I'm sure I can do it. There was silence in the room. Kiona looked from me to her father and back again, clearly unsure of how to react to this surreal situation. Her mother was crying silently, covering her mouth with the palm of her hand. I'll be back in an hour to pick you up for pre-op prep. I headed for the exit but stopped at the door. By the way, the surgery is elective, but it's an emergency. Insurance covers 80% of the cost. The rest, about $15,000, you'll have to pay for it yourself. I left the room without waiting for a reaction. It was petty, I knew that. But I couldn't resist a little revenge, a reminder of the money I'd once been denied. Preparing for surgery helped me focus. I went over all the scans again, discussed the specifics of the case with the anesthesiologist, checked the instruments. The routine calmed me down, put me back on track. When my father was brought into the operating room, he was already under the influence of premedication, sleepy, relaxed. I went over to him, as I did before every surgery, to say a few soothing words. His eyes were half closed, but he recognized me. Tallulah, he mumbled. I didn't know. Didn't think. It's going to be okay. I squeezed his hand, a professional gesture of support that I did for every patient. Just relax and trust me. It was a strange irony. He had to trust me, the same loser he'd once refused to trust. Surgery is underway. As soon as the scalpel touched the skin, all extraneous thoughts disappeared. All that remained were my father's hands, his instruments, his beating heart. In the operating room, I was in my element, confident, precise, calm, There was no room for doubt or emotional conflict. Bypass surgery is a complex, lengthy procedure that requires absolute concentration. You have to stop the heart, hook the patient up to a circulatory machine, isolate healthy vessels, create bypass routes for blood around narrowed arteries, and then restart the heart. Every step is a potential danger. Every movement counts. I worked methodically, habitually commenting on my actions for the assistants. No one in the operating room realized that the patient on the table was my father. To them, it was just another surgery at Dr. Bramble's. 4 hours later, I finished the last stitch and straightened up, feeling the familiar ache in my back after standing in one position for so long. "Good job," the anesthesiologist nodded. "My vitals are stable." I took off my gloves and mask, feeling the sudden fatigue that always came after surgery. But this time it was deeper, heavier, the emotional exhaustion layered on top of the physical. In the waiting room, Mother and Kiona jumped up when they saw me. Their faces were tense, their eyes demanding answers before they could ask a question. "The surgery was a success," I said, keeping my tone professional. "We've placed 3 shunts, and blood flow has been restored. The next 24 hours are critical, but the prognosis is favorable." My mother burst into tears and Kiona put her arm around her shoulders. I stood across from her, feeling strangely detached, like I was watching a scene from a movie. "When can we see him?" Kiona asked after a pause. "In a couple hours when he's transferred from the ICU to the ICU, I answered. "Right now he's under observation." I turned to leave, but my mother's voice stopped me. "Tallulah, wait," she stepped forward. "We need to talk." "I have paperwork to fill out." I shook my head. "And I have 2 more counseling sessions today." "Please," her voice was pleading. "Just for a little while. 9 years, Tallulah. 9 years we haven't known where you are. What's wrong with you?" "You could have found out." My voice was quiet but firm. "One call to the university. 1 letter. But you didn't try, did you?" She lowered her eyes, recognizing the rightness of my words. "I'm a coward," she whispered. "I always have been. Letting your father decide everything even when I knew he was wrong, especially when I knew he was wrong." I looked at this broken woman, my mother, who had always been more of a shadow of my father than a person in her own right. And suddenly I realized that I felt no anger or resentment toward her, only fatigue and something akin to regret. "I booked us a table at the cafe across from the hospital," Kiona intervened. "In an hour, if you can join us, just for a little while." I glanced at my sister, the always confident, always beloved Kiona, who was now looking at me with undisguised respect and maybe even envy. "Okay," I nodded after a pause. "In an hour." The hour flew by unnoticed in routine business. I filled out paperwork, checked in patients, and changed into my usual clothes, dark pants and a white blouse, simple but elegant. My everyday clothes, which nevertheless cost more than anything I wore in Henderson. The cafe was half empty, the middle of the day, between lunch and dinner. Mother and Kiona were already waiting at a table by the window, both tense and nervous, unsure how to begin this difficult conversation. "I can stay for half an hour at the most," I said, sitting down across from them. "I have a counseling session at 4. "Of course," my mother nodded. "We understand you're busy." There was an awkward pause. The waitress brought the menu, and we automatically ordered. When she left, Kiona finally broke the silence. "Are you really the chief surgeon?" she asked. "At 30 years old?" 29, actually, I shrugged. "When I was appointed, my predecessor retired earlier than planned, and I was promoted." "That's impressive," Kiona shook her head. "I had no idea." "You didn't ask," I replied simply. "We didn't know how to contact you," my mother interjected. "You left without leaving an address?" "The university had my contact information," I sipped my water. "And the hospital where I interned, and the Boston clinic for 3 years. I never hid." "Your father—" My mother started, but I interrupted her. "Mr. Bramble," I corrected her. "He's my patient at the moment, nothing more." Mother flinched as if struck by a blow. "Don't say that, Tallulah. No matter what happens, he's still your father." The father who kicked me out of the house and called me a loser? I kept my composure, but something inside me was trembling. Who refused to help me with my education even though he paid for Kiona's college? Who had never, not once in his life, said he was proud of me? "He's changed," Kiona said quietly. "After you left, something in him broke. He talked about you a lot, especially in the last few years. He was looking for information about medical universities, hoping to find your name on the alumni lists." I looked at my sister in disbelief. "And why didn't he contact me when he found me?" "Pride," she shrugged. "Fear, shame. Pick one of those." The waitress brought our order. Salad for me, sandwiches for them. We ate in silence, each immersed in our own thoughts. "How did you do?" my mother finally asked. "All these years alone with no support?" "Not alone," I shook my head. "I had friends, mentors, people who believed in me when you didn't." "I always believed," my mother whispered. "I just didn't have the courage to say it out loud. What good is faith that no one knows about?" I looked her in the eye. "Especially to a child who desperately needs support?" She lowered her eyes, unable to find an answer. "We made a mistake," Kiona said suddenly. "All of us. Me too. I was selfish, spoiled, taking for granted what you were denied. And I'm sorry." The sincerity in her voice surprised me. The Kiona I remembered never admitted her mistakes. "What has happened to you over the years?" I asked, suddenly interested in their lives. "With you, with Mom, with Henderson?" "Nothing much." Kiona smiled weakly. "I still work at the same pharmacy, married, divorced, no kids. Mom retired 2 years ago." "The house is still the same?" I didn't know why I was asking that. Maybe part of me still thought of that house as my own. "It's the same," my mother nodded. "Only the porch had been remodeled, and your room. It's still yours. I didn't change anything." That detail touched me unexpectedly. The little room overlooking the neighbor's garage, preserved as a museum, as a reminder of the daughter they'd lost. "Look, Tallulah," Kiona leaned forward. "I understand that we can't just apologize and make things right. Too much time has passed, too much pain has been inflicted. But maybe we could start over, get to know each other again?" I looked at them, my mother and sister, so familiar and yet so alien at the same time. Part of me wanted to agree, to reach out my hand toward them. The other part remembered every hurt, every humiliation, every unshed tear. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I built my life without you. And it's, good. I'm not sure I want to risk what I've built by letting the past back in." "We understand," my mother nodded. "Just don't close the door completely. Give us a chance to show that we've changed too." I looked at the clock. My time was running out. Counseling was waiting. "I'll observe my father for a week," I said, standing up. "After that, he will be able to return to Henderson under the care of a local cardiologist. I'll make recommendations for rehabilitation and medications. As his doctor, I'll do whatever is necessary." "And what about his daughter?" the mother asked quietly. I paused, not knowing what to say. Finally, I said, "I don't know who I am to him, or who he is to me, but I'm willing to think about it." It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation or even a promise, just a tiny crack in the wall I'd built around my heart, a tiny opportunity for something new. "Thank you," Kiona nodded, realizing she couldn't get more than that right now. "For the surgery, for the conversation, for everything." I nodded and headed for the exit. As I stopped at the door, I turned around and saw them, the 2 women at the table, looking at me with hope and regret. Perhaps I'll never be able to forgive them completely. Perhaps the wound is too deep to ever heal without a scar. But maybe scars aren't always a bad thing. Sometimes they remind us not only of the pain, but that we are survivors, that we are stronger than we thought. I walked outside, breathing in the cold Boston air. Ahead of me was counseling, surgeries, patients, my whole life that I had built with my own hands. And behind me was a past that maybe I shouldn't have completely dismissed. Time would tell.